All right, let's start with the big story that we are tracking here at WION, where India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's on a two-day visit to China, has met with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Wuhan on Friday and also stressed on resetting the bilateral relations that were strained in the backdrop of the Doklam crisis. Now, today was the second day of the meet, and here Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be attending a private lunch hosted by the Chinese President. Now, earlier in the morning, Prime Minister Narendra Modi resumed one-on-one talks with President Xi Jinping. They began with a walk around the East Lake and then also embarked on a boat ride. Now, after the informal summit, for which no agenda for the meeting had been set, Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale highlighted the various issues that were discussed by the two leaders. Now, in the press briefing, Vijay Gokhale said that India and China will work towards points of congruence.
Bilateral trade and investment formed an important part of the discussion. The two leaders underlined that trade should be balanced, it should be sustainable, and that we should take advantage of the complementarities between the two economies to enhance our trade and investment.
The peace and tranquility will also be maintained at the border, and strategic guidance will be given to the militaries of both the nations, along with confidence-building measures that the nations will be embarking upon.
Issue of the India-China boundary question, the two leaders endorsed the work of the special representatives in their efforts to find a fair, reasonable and mutually acceptable settlement. And the two leaders also underscored that in the meantime, it is important to maintain peace and tranquility in all areas of the India-China border region.
So on one side, there was this very contentious issue of the border dispute between India and China that was brought up, and also the issue of building the confidence between the armies of the two nations, for which strategic guidance will be given by the respective governments to their respective armies, so that there is no further incidents, such as what happened in the case of Doklam. Now, apart from this, there were other issues also which were discussed, which Vijay Gokhale pointed out, where the two nations will also promote tourism and people-to-people exchanges. Soft diplomacy through films will also be promoted. Apart from this, cooperation in climate change, sustainable development and counter-terrorism were also discussed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping. Now, India and China are also likely to venture into a joint economic project in Afghanistan as well.
President Xi Jinping actually said that he had seen a number of Indian films, both Bollywood and regional, and that it would be a good idea to expand this, that more Indian films should come to China, more Chinese films should go to India.
And also earlier on Friday, the two leaders held a delegation-level talks with Indian Prime Minister, in which he emphasized on making such informal summits an annual tradition. The Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also invited the Chinese President to India next year for an informal summit. All right, now to discuss more on this, we are joined in our studios by Ambassador Arun Singh, who was the former Indian ambassador to the United States. We're also joined by Mr. Sushant Sareen, who is a strategic affairs expert, and we'll also be joined by Professor Chen Hong, who is the director for the Asia Pacific Studies, Normal University's Australian Studies Centre based in Shanghai. Now, Ambassador Singh, let me actually begin by asking you this. Now, this was, of course, a summit that was very high on optics. There was a lot that was, in fact, riding in terms of resetting ties. Do you think much of that has been accomplished?
So here, I think the optics were very much part of the substance.
Right.
Because the aim was to send a message to everyone about how the two leaders are attempting to bring about a new framework for the relations. And to be fair, the outcome was exactly how has been projected from official side so far. That the attempt is not to go into specific issues, but to look at the overarching aspects of the relationship. So some of the things that struck me from what the Foreign Secretary said, that the discussion was on overarching issues of bilateral and global interest. And that the priorities of their national development in the current global context were discussed. There was clearly a reference to better management at the border, which you also referred to, the trade and economic issues, and terrorism and other aspects of cooperation. So I would say that the message that came out from the summit was that the two leaders have set a strategic course for a more cooperative framework for the relationship. Based on this, the established mechanisms will now look at different issues, and we have to watch how that evolves.
You know, it's interesting the manner in which these entire talks were in fact focused upon. There was the regional aspect to it, and there was also the larger, greater worldview aspect of it. If I can in fact bring in Professor Chen Hong here. Now, Professor Hong, you know, one of the statements that was in fact made after these talks, which were held on a one-to-one level between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping, you know, it was reiterated that regional and global issues were discussed, and a plural and a participative world order is what is being sought to be explored in these talks. How does that strike you, a plural and a participative world order?
Prime Minister Modi is a statesman of foresight and insight. He has demonstrated his political wisdom, his diplomatic flair, and his practical approaches, which are necessary to improve and develop our bilateral relations. What is the most impressive is this year at the Davos Economic Forum, Prime Minister Modi made his keynote speech in which he reiterated the importance of globalization. He said protectionism and isolation are not the solution to world problems. Free trade and globalization are the key to the development of the world economy. This is recognized as an echo to President Xi Jinping's last year's speech in Davos. So China never considers India as a strategic rival. China is willing to work with India to solve differences and towards mutual collaboration to the benefits of peace and development. And the world is full of uncertainties, and the two giants in Asia can work together to bring stability and optimism to the world. That is what we have been having as our feeling in China.
Absolutely. That's a very optimistic way of looking as to how the India-China relationship will develop, considering the fact that both the nations are very close neighbors. They're also extremely competitive, both in their economies and in strategic affairs as well. You know, Ambassador Singh, let me bring you in on this. You know, India and China, the way they are poised at this point of time, both are emerging economies. China is, yes, ahead of India, but at the same time, India is the fastest economy now and is fast catching up. Can there be cooperation at a time when we are so competitive?
So yes, I think our leaders have argued for some time that there's enough space in Asia and the world for a peaceful and harmonious rise of both India and China. For example, in the 2015 joint statement when Prime Minister Modi had gone to China, it was said that the leaders agreed that simultaneous re-emergence of India and China as two major powers in the region and the world offers a momentous opportunity for realization of the Asian century. So there will be element of competition, but we need to also have framework of cooperation and move forward on that basis.
Absolutely, indeed. And just very quickly here, there was this issue of, you know, greater cooperation for an economic project in Afghanistan was discussed. How do you see that panning out here?
The very fact that it has now been suggested that they have agreed to do a joint project in Afghanistan in itself is certainly significant. Because so far China has been reluctant to engage with India in the Afghanistan context. They have concerns related to how Pakistan may react. Afghans have, of course, wanted to involve China more and more in terms of what's happening there, because that will enhance the opportunity for them. And also they feel that China may then work to curtail some of Pakistan's negative behavior. US has also been wanting to involve China more in Afghanistan, because then the effort they are making could get reduced. So China has so far been reluctant. Now, if they have agreed to do a joint project with India, in itself it's a major significance and a major message, and Pakistan will certainly be concerned. But we should look at what that project is. And the specific dimensions of the project would then enable us to assess how significant, beyond the principle of it, this step is.
Absolutely, because at this point of time, the specifics as to what this economic project is have not in fact been divulged. But this, of course, will be an interesting thing to see as to have cooperation in what has been so far a very troubled nation, Afghanistan, will in fact play out between India and China. I thank all my guests, Ambassador Singh and also Professor Chang, for in fact joining us on this broadcast. Now, this of course is an extremely significant summit. It was an informal summit for which there was no agenda that had been set, and it now remains to be seen as to how far this has actually gone ahead in resetting what were little turbulent times between India and China, especially in the last few months. So as Prime Minister Narendra Modi and also President Xi Jinping began their two-day summit, an official status report in Wuhan on India-China relations said that a closer economic relationship is now a part of bilateral ties. Now, China's state-run news agency Xinhua also reported that economic ties between China and India have become closer in recent years. The report also further pointed out that bilateral trade had reached a record high of almost $84.4 billion last year, up by about 20.3% from the year 2016. This is the fastest growth for almost 5 years. It also goes on to mention that China has become the largest trading partner of India, with imports rising by more than 40% in the year 2017. In addition, Xinhua has reported that the Chinese investment in India has added up to more than about $8 billion by the end of 2017, with India being an important destination for infrastructure cooperation and investment. Meanwhile, China's hardline daily Global Times has suggested that the Modi-Xi meeting heralds a new chapter in the Sino-Indian relationship. Now, the newspaper mentions China should in fact let India know that Beijing does not define New Delhi as an opponent, nor does it seek to hinder its development. The Global Times further suggested that China should in fact convince India that the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor project is based on promoting economic cooperation and does not influence China's neutrality. However, it also went on to mention that India should not use Tibet as a bargaining chip in the relationship.